Parsons upstairs in the newsroom. Yes, we have been scrapping the script the last hour as the news has come in that those 4 French hostages taken a little over 3 years ago have now been freed. The announcement was made by the French president himself on a trip to Slovakia. Joining me here in the studio is France 24 politics editor Doug Perelman, who's been following this story closely. As you were telling us earlier, you just spoken to Niger's interior minister. The 4 hostages, you were saying, safe in Niger's capital, very, very far from that compound near that uranium-producing mine where they were taken some 3 years ago.
Yes, the latest news is that they were on their way to a residence, presumably the residence of the ambassador, the French ambassador to Niger, that they had arrived at the airport. I heard the sirens of the police in the background during this very quick conversation. So this is what we know. They are in Niamey. The French foreign and defense ministers are on their way to fetch them, bring them back, presumably to Paris tomorrow morning in good health. What we don't know is how they got to Niamey. When I asked the interior minister, he said, I'm not going to answer that question. So lots of mysteries, lots of questions. Was this the result of a negotiation? Was this the result of a military offensive? Obviously, the Islamist groups have been on the run since the French offensive. And the question was whether they would release the hostages as an exchange for maybe staying alive and being allowed to stay in the very north of Mali.
That's an important point you just make. A little over 1 year ago, the French go into Mali to stop an Islamist offensive towards the south of the country. They did so knowing there were those hostages that were still there. Those hostages, though, not executed, instead held for ransom. It seems, we don't know whether a ransom, of course, has been paid, though.
Right. I mean, officially, François Hollande has said it's over now with ransoms. France doesn't pay hostage takers because it only encourages them. And we've seen more hostage taking of French citizens in recent months. That being said, the families were just terrified when they learned that the French were going to war to Mali, because they said the first things that the hostage takers are going to do, the French military is coming against them, they're just going to kill them. And the French president said, no, this doesn't have an impact on the situation of the hostages. And today it proves he was right. How did this happen? Why did the hostage takers not take the lives of their hostages is a mystery. Maybe this was a bargaining chip that they had. The question is now, what did they get in exchange if they got something?
All right, we'll go more into the nuts and bolts of who was holding these hostages in a moment. First, though, let's welcome our guests joining us from London, Paul Melly at Chatham House. He has been following this. And joining us from the United States, from Washington, security analyst Andrew Leibowitz. Welcome as well, sir. These hostages being freed. We knew something the last few days was up, Andrew Leibowitz. Not a complete surprise.
No, it's not a complete surprise, and there have been increasing reports, especially in the last about 2 months or so, about negotiations picking up again, about the various actors who might have been involved in these negotiations, including a former senior officer of the French military, former French secret operative. So it's not completely a surprise, but still, of course, that these hostages have been freed.
Paul Melly, it is a good news story. It hasn't always been the case that hostages taken in the Sahara have been freed.
No, there have been several hostages who've either died in rescue attempts or from ill health, and in at least one definite case, the British citizen Edwin Dyer, deliberately executed by AMQI in the Sahara. So this was certainly not an outcome that could be guaranteed, and the fears of the hostages' families when the French military and the Chadian military engaged in their offensive to drive jihadist groups out of northern Mali, certainly there were very good reasons for the families to be worried. But also there is a tradition, a substantial element of the jihadist movements and groups that have been active in the Sahel who have seen hostage-taking as a very lucrative business opportunity. So there were risks that the hostages faced a real risk but there was also a possibility that groups would seek to get something in return, whether it was money or whether it was some sort of political position or a security position, a chance to escape or something. So there were risks and there were plus opportunities, if you like.
All right, risks and also positives in this case. Again, if you're just joining us, those 4 hostages freed. There are 3 other French hostages still being held somewhere in the Sahara. The French President François Hollande making the announcement himself while on a visit to the Slovakian capital.
I wish to express all my gratitude to the President of Niger, who has succeeded in securing the release of our compatriots. I am also thinking, nevertheless, of the 7 French hostages who are still being held. 2 are in the Sahel, 1 in Nigeria, 4 in Syria. I wish to say to them this simple message: do not give up hope.
All right, and there you heard the French president. Defense minister, the foreign minister already on their way to Niger. Again, as Paul Melly was saying, as Andrew Leibowitz was saying, this is something, suddenly there seemed to be an opening the last couple of weeks.
Right. I understand that the French defense minister actually went apparently secretly in the region in recent weeks to make sure things were happening. The real question is whether this was part of the military offensive which we've seen in Mali, and that this actually was hiding a rescue operation, or if there were indeed negotiations. The French president thanked his counterpart from Niger, Mahamadou Issoufou. I've interviewed the Niger president several times. We've talked about the hostage situation. He recently told me that they were indeed in good health and indicated that there were probably channels open with the hostage takers. And there is also François Hollande and the president of Niger are close friends because they're both socialists. So there's clearly, there was a channel that was open despite many offers by many go-betweens in the region who were probably there for money. We've seen reports of infighting between several negotiating teams over
that have scuttled past
tents. So the real question is whether there was money involved. François Hollande said, we're going to Mali to war to make sure there's no more drug trafficking, there's no more hostage taking. This has to stop both in principle but also as a business. So if there is evidence surfacing that the French indeed paid, or that the French companies paid, not the state, which has happened in the past, this would really put in question his pledge that France will not negotiate, but actually only...
A bit of a semantic exercise there. Maybe the French state doesn't pay, but do French companies pay? Andrew Leibowitz, I know this has gone in for a lot of criticism, especially because sometimes the amounts of money that they're asking for are more than the entire defense budgets of the countries where these hostages are being held.
Yes, it's certainly been a major concern over the last several years as people, I think, began to realize how much money AQIM had potentially amassed over the years, and certainly money that allowed them to function, money that allowed them to pay bribes, to pay for goods and supplies, and to help ingratiate themselves, especially in northern Mali, but also more broadly within the region.
I mean, if I may just add, one figure that had been making the rounds was that the hostage takers were asking for 90 million euros, 90 million.
90.
Yes. And so those were the figures that were bandied around. And so you can, maybe this is an inflated figure, but you could see that it's a lot of money people are talking about when it comes to hostages. And in the past, there are indications that money has been paid for the release of previous Western hostages.
All right, another person who's seen that something was up is correspondent Alex Duval-Smith, who joins us from the capital of neighboring Mali. Alex, you were saying a short while ago to us that some 2 weeks ago, there were reports of some French people in the northern city of Gao.
There had been reports sort of creeping up over the last week of a negotiation team having been seen in Gao. Gao is where the main French military base is in Mali. It's slightly surprising because diplomats usually tell us that hostages, if they're held in Mali, are held in the very far north of Mali, but then that doesn't rule out an emissary perhaps being sent to Gao, and Gao having been the site of negotiations. But I have to say, this is very much speculation.
Very much speculation. We know that the areas where these hostages could have possibly been held, if indeed it was inside of Malian territory, are hugely difficult to get to.
Well, that's right, and they may well also be in Nigeria, some of these areas. Sorry, not Nigeria, in Algeria. And indeed, we understand that hostages are regularly moved to fit in, of course, with the battle plans and restrictions imposed by the presence of foreign troops in Mali.
Alex Duval-Smith, many thanks. We'll continue to go to you for more updates as this breaking story continues to unfold. The reactions, of course, in Mali, very important. Seeing as there still is, of course, that French force that is inside of Mali, Mark Perelman, after flushing out those Islamist rebels, Islamists who are of different shades. And that also brings us to the issue of how these hostages were released. The Paris publication West Africa Newsletter reporting that Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb was using as a channel the leader of a Tuareg Islamist group, Ansar el-Din. Again, it's a bit confusing, but what we know is there's different shades of Islamists and there's different groups out there.
Yes, absolutely. There are different groups, and because of the pressure they've seen coming from the French and other armies, there's also been infighting. Some of the leaders have been killed, some of their troops have been weakened, and so there's probably a reshuffling of the cards happening right now, and it's likely that some of those groups or some of those leaders maybe reached out and say, okay, we're in dire straits. Maybe they reached out to the government of Niger or other go-betweens to say, okay, let's negotiate, let's make sure that maybe we release the hostages, and maybe some of the claims by Tuaregs in Niger and in Mali about having more autonomy will get a better hearing in the capitals, in Niamey in Niger and in Bamako in Mali. This is all speculation, but clearly because of the French offensive, all the cards have been reshuffled in the region, and what happened today is probably a result of that.
All right. Oftentimes, the first place you hear about news of hostages is the capital, and this again shows just how mobile these groups are, is the capital of Mauritania. We can go there now to Nouakchott, and the correspondent there, Laurent Prieur. Laurent, on your end,
good evening.
What have you seen there?
Sorry, I didn't hear your question about what. I've seen what?
What have you seen there? Have there been any reactions today? And have you noticed any particular activity or statements coming out of Nouakchott where a lot of the middlemen transit?
So far, nothing, but it's a bit hard. I was actually with the president of Mauritania and Chad president Idriss Déby this morning. They were at a conference on Sahel. And they talked about Hakim, and none of them seemed to know about it at the time, or at least they must have hidden it really well if they knew. Here in Mauritania, it's indeed a place where the whole situation is followed really closely, not only because, as you mentioned, many medias are publishing communiques from Hakim or videos of hostages and such, but also because a lot of Mauritanian religious scholars are involved in Hakim and more widely in other jihadi Salafist movements in all the Muslim world.
Laurent Prieur, Reuters correspondent, thanks for joining us live from the capital of Mauritania. If you're just joining us on France 24, 4 French hostages released. The announcement made by the French president himself. The hostages who work for French nuclear giant Areva were taken with 3 others in a daring raid on their compound near the giant uranium mines that are in the north of Niger. More now from Shirley Sitbon.
This was the home of Daniel and Françoise Laribe, where they were kidnapped on September 16, 2010, by terrorists linked to Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. 5 other people were kidnapped that night in the city of Arlit, a major mining site in Niger. They all worked for nuclear giant Areva and Vinci subcontractors. Niger's authorities say the companies could have done more to protect their employees.
This kidnapping took place because Areva's employees were not protected by Niger's security forces. I'm not criticizing Areva, that's just a fact.
The kidnappers took the hostages to an unknown location in the Sahel region, where they took these pictures. They show Daniel and Françoise Laribe, Thierry Dole, Pierre Legrand, and Marc Ferret in captivity. Françoise Laribe, who had health problems, was released in February 2011, along with a hostage from Togo and one from Madagascar. A second video was released at the end of August 2012.
It's been 2 years. It's not normal. Have you forgotten us? I went to Arlit for a specific job, not for tourism. My company should contact Al-Qaeda and do what it must to free me.
This summer, a third video was released. In Paris, the victims' families called for action.
The French government can't just abandon these French citizens. It's their duty to find solutions that would allow their quick release.
In previous cases, the French government is reported to have paid ransoms to secure their citizens' release, though the government has always denied it. 3 other French nationals were abducted in Mali in 2011. Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb said it executed one of them, Philippe Verdon, in March 2013.
And as this news comes in, Paul Melly, let me ask you this question. Do you feel as though the Sahel, this vast expanse between Algeria, Niger, Mali, Mauritania, do you believe that it's a different place today than it was, say, a year ago when the French were intervening?
It's been fundamentally changed, both in positive respects, because obviously the jihadist domination of northern Mali has been ended, but also in other respects that make the region less stable. The whole of southern Libya, for example, is effectively out of the control of the Libyan government, and there are regularly reports that both jihadists and people from the other former Tuareg rebel groups in northern Mali move across northern Niger and into southern Libya in relative freedom. And there isn't, for example, any authority in Tripoli that can effectively impose control on that region at the moment. We've seen huge drug smuggling flows in the past through the Sahel. Nobody's quite sure at the moment exactly where the drug trafficking and where the money is moving at the moment. It's become, in some ways, much less certain. So that opens up opportunities which can be turned to positive effect sometimes, as with the hostage releases today, where the strengths and weaknesses of different parties, the balance of powers have shifted, but it also makes it much harder to plan ahead and establish for either West African governments or Maghreb governments or the international community to try and work out a strategy for developing a new and more stable Sahel. It's become more complicated and in some ways much more fluctuating, much more flexible as a region
than it was before. Paul Melly, I want to thank you for joining us in London. I want to thank Andrew Leibowich in Washington, our correspondents throughout West Africa. Mark Perelman, many thanks. This is, of course, a story that Laura Cillier will continue to follow with, of course, reactions from the families and political reactions at the top of the hour. For us, we're going to say goodbye. Quick break. When we come back, part 2. And in the France 24 debate, we're going to be looking at a whole different scene, the situation over in China after that explosion Monday on Tiananmen Square. Stay with us.